All right, so we're going to talk about the bubonic plague and how it affected Europe. And we just had a conversation about how the plague contributes to the end of feudalism, right? How it adversely impacts the peasant class, the serfs, and how that the concept of class interdependence dictates that if we remove one of these classes from the feudal structure, the structure kind of fractures and collapses. So that's a big part of what we're talking about. So bubonic plague. Here we go. All right. I'll give you a second here. Shouldn't take long. Excuse me. So, and when we have this discussion about this slide, we really need to go back to the Crusades, right? Because we said that one of the impacts of the Crusades was an increase in trade between East and West. So that increase in trade between East and West is what's going to facilitate the spread of the bubonic plague. So the plague starts as a disease that is, essentially lying dormant in Asia. And fleas become infected with the disease and they kind of hitch a ride on rats. And those rats hitch a ride on trading ships. And it is that trade that brings those ships from Asia all the way to the Mediterranean world. And this brings with it these plague-infested fleas that are attached to all these rats. The rats scurry off these trading ships when they reach port in the Mediterranean, Italy, and a lot of other places. We know that that was a major trading port, right, because of the Roman Empire. Once they scurry off of there, then those fleas start biting people, and now we have the plague. All right, I'll pause for a second. So, severity. The plague is a disease that's going to kill 25 million people, about 1/3 of Europe in 4 years. So, I mean, to put it into perspective, a third of America would be like 110 million people. So, and it's over the course of 4 years. So this is what, 20, 25, 25 million people a year and some change, obviously. 25, 20, 27 million people a year for 4 years. That's crazy. So that if the plague struck the United States with the same severity that it struck Europe during the 1300s, we would lose 110 million people over the course of 4 years. That's how severe it was. So you can see with this map kind of where it begins and how fast it spreads and from where and etc. So the earliest is this pink, this kind of pink color. Sicily, Sardinia, Marseille here, right? So these are the huge trading ports, right? So from there, it kind of balloons outwards. So you can see this light purple color, all of, the Italian peninsula and into Spain and France. And then, the mountain region, here's the Alps, right? And then it just kind of spreads throughout the rest of Northern Europe. There's a couple of enclaves, these little green areas that for whatever reason were unaffected. Probably has something to do with the culture there. They could probably insular communities that aren't, accepting to outsiders or something like that. So you can see kind of and it shows the arrows kind of how it's kind of progressing up through Europe. Pretty ugly. So when you get the plague, basically what happens is your flesh starts rotting off of your body while it's still attached to you. You come down with some light symptoms early. That's basically like severe cough and like cold and flu symptoms and severe fatigue, and then eventually you start developing boils on your skin. You can see on the neck of this person, this is a recreation. This is not real, this picture on the bottom right. And then your flesh basically starts rotting off of your body. And ultimately what happens a lot of the time is it's not necessarily the bubonic plague that kills you, but your rotting flesh kind of causes sepsis, which is blood poisoning, and you die from blood poisoning. That's usually kind of how it goes. It's quick. From the onset of symptoms to death is less than a week, usually, and in the 14th century. So that's kind of what we're talking about. This is really quick, and it's the speed that is frightening because we're seeing similar things now, right? With COVID, it spreads so fast that people who are not even showing symptoms can spread this and to other people before they even know. And that's a factor. And also people in the 14th century are just generally ignorant as to how disease spreads in general, or at least, more ignorant than we are now. So, there's a lack of understanding, and it's also an unprecedented kind of sickness. So I'll pause a second here. So we spent a lot of time talking about like the living conditions of peasants and how they lived in really, really cramped quarters and poor hygiene and no access to, medical care. That's a given. So the disease runs rampant, kind of wipes out the peasant class, the serf class, right? And they're the labor pool. So the labor pool is shrinking and disappearing. And what happens is labor is not as available as it once was, where the reason feudalism exists is because there's so many people who want work, and they start undercutting each other to the point where, okay, I'll work as long as you give me a roof and some food. Like, you don't even have to pay me. And that's really what feudalism kind of evolves into, right? But the reason it does that is because the labor pool is so big and there's so many people willing to kind of go lower and lower until all of a sudden everybody's doing it for just shelter, basically. Well, when the labor pool dries up, that changes. Now, all of a sudden, labor is a hot commodity. There's not as many laborers on Earth because the plague is wiping out the peasant class, that all of a sudden these people become a more valued commodity than they have been for the past several hundred years. So landowners start offering freedom and payment for work. The idea is that wait, now this guy's telling me he's going to pay me. You better pay me, or else I'm not working for you for free anymore. Because there's so many laborers dying off that every landowner is looking for laborers however they can get them, and they're bidding against each other. You know what I mean? So the tables kind of turn, and this leads to kind of the end of that kind of that condition of indentured servitude that the serfs found themselves in for the last several hundred years. So this kind of has huge mega impacts on feudalism, and between the Crusades and the plague, it really kind of spells the end of feudalism as we know it.